Welcome back to another Reddit readings video. If you enjoy these stories, don't be scared to leave a like. Now, do be scared. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Redditors who work at remote places like forest officers, oil rig workers, etc. What creepy things have you noticed while at work? I worked at a public forest. One day we had someone report a dead animal on the side of one of our trails. A few of us from the front desk hiked out to see what it was. It looked like a giant piece of, or maybe, just a pile of smooth red meat, no blood around, and it was wrapped up in a t-shirt with some coins scattered around it. We called our rangers to go check it out, and one of them was pretty sure it was a placenta. The weird part is, you have to check in through a front desk. So someone either snuck a placenta, liver in, or gave live birth or removed an organ on our trails. We never got an answer on what the pile of meat was, how it got there, or why. I do a lot of stream work, so I spend time out in pretty rural areas walking streams and rivers. Once my coworker and I were working in a more urban environment and came across what we initially thought was a body, which of course triggered "oh shit" from us, but it ended up being a firefighter's dummy that had fallen down a hill. We felt pretty dumb. Other notable things include a small grave in the middle of nowhere for someone's dog, pretty sad, and a stuffed rabbit with shotgun shells placed where its eyes should be, a mannequin very purposely placed in a chair in the middle of the woods, and lots of little random altars. I also did work in Myrtle Beach, what a hellhole, and accidentally walked into an inhabited homeless camp. I was peering into a stormwater grate when I looked up and saw a homeless person standing in his shelter staring at us and saying nothing. I felt like I was trespassing, so we quietly left. I used to work in a ship and we're usually gone 3 to 10 months at a time. I worked night shift, so this meant I would sleep in the sleeping quarters during daytime with either just me or a handful of other crew members, where usually there'd be 20 to 30 of us in there. It wasn't so bad. Actually, I really liked because it's a lot more peaceful sleeping during the day. You don't hear anybody else snoring or someone's footsteps because they have to piss or something like that. All you can hear is the light creak of the walls and the floors of the ship, and all you can feel is the sway of it on the ocean. A bit haunting and creepy if you really think about it, but I like it. All that ended when there was a short period of time was literally only 2 of us in there, or at least that's what I thought. I started hearing light taps across the room. At first they were light taps, then it would get a bit faster. Sometimes it'll get a bit louder. I'd ignore it if it wasn't so utterly annoying. I look at where the other guy is sleeping and he seems to be fast asleep, accompanied by his light snoring. Second day, there it goes again. I tried to follow the sound, but for some reason it bounced around the room like an echo. Eventually it comes to an abrupt halt, so I try to sleep it off. During work at night I tried to ask my mate about it, but he said he was too tired to even notice. I guess I'm alone on this pursuit. Third day, I take my pursuit one step further by not sleeping right away. I'd be fully awake when it starts, so I'll have a better chance of discovering the source. There it goes again. This time I go from one empty rack to the next until finally it was loud as fuck, tapping in progress. My heart was thumping like a jackhammer. I pulled the curtain to the side. There lay the biggest dude I've ever seen on the ship, holding his dick mid-stroke. You have no idea the speech I prepared for this guy in my head for keeping me up for several days, but at that exact moment I had no idea what to say. Of course, I gave out a small yelp, which didn't help the situation. I never thought I'd be locking eyes with another dude while he's gripping his dong when I began this honorable pursuit. With the current situation, I mustered my best attempt at displaying my annoyance. It somehow came out as an apology, followed by "I keep hearing tapping noises." He hadn't said anything yet, but at that exact moment, I realized that his elbow, which belonged to the fapping arm, is resting right on the wall, probably banging on it over and over and over. I didn't wait for a reply. I nodded my head, kind of rolled my eye, and walked away. It will never be easy trying to avoid a big guy like him every day in the same sleeping quarters. I work on North Sea oil rigs on an ad hoc basis off the coast of Scotland. Wouldn't say anything was particularly paranormal creepy, but it can be very unsettling. Weird place. Fog can come rolling in out of nowhere, and other rigs you can see off the sides can disappear in front of your eyes. Sometimes you can't see the walkway 6 feet in front of you, or if you're walking over grading you can't see the sea below your feet, about 60 meters down from feck to sea. But you can hear it, albeit muffled. The fog can roll in over the course of a few minutes too, so a perfectly clear day becomes pea soup. You can also feel the rig moving, swaying on high winds, rough seas, even though it's a fixed leg platform. Very unnerving to feel your office swaying when it shouldn't be. My last trip was my first ever night shift, and I found it particularly unsettling as you've got the background noise at the plant, but I walked around the whole rig without seeing another living soul for the whole shift. Usually there are about 130 people on board, although smaller rigs have smaller headcounts. Usually once a trip I'm hit by this awareness that you are just very isolated and in the middle of nowhere. Most rigs I've worked on are an hour's chopper ride from land, so if things go wrong it can escalate very. During college that was located away from major cities, the woods were all around us. That being said, there was a highly rated trail, the Loyal Soak Trail, which was about an hour drive from the university. I invited a friend to come with me as he had never been on an extended backpacking trip, a 50-plus mile trail that we intended to backpack over the 4-day weekend. I am an Eagle Scout who has spent countless hours in the woods and went on backpacking trips consistently throughout my college experience. As many have said before me, you get used to the minor spooky things happening, coyote howls, raccoons in the middle of the night, even the occasional unknown noise. The scariest thing to find in the woods, however, are people. We were about 20 miles into the trail, and being Pennsylvania where the underbrush and trees line the trails pretty densely, I always walk about 100 meters off of the trail to reduce the chances of me disturbing people. People disturbing me, especially in the early morning when I choose to sleep in. Following that same strategy, my friend and I go out of our way to be in this amazing spot a good ways off of the trail where it would even be difficult to see our flashlights from the trail. This spot was on a peninsula where a creek met a river, meaning there was only one way into our camp and only one way out. We start a fire, cook our food, and drink some, but not enough to get either of us drunk. We put the fire out about midnight and head into our individual tents. All is quiet. It is the fall semester, so leaves are on the ground, the moon is brightly shining through the bare trees, and the air is cool. The only noise is the occasional time when I would hear my friend turn over in his sleep. Then I hear the voices. The voices sounded very close for being on the trail 100+ meters away. I check my watch. 3 a.m. Who hikes at 3 a.m.? We are 20 miles in. I slowly get out of my sleeping bag, slowly unzip my tent, only to see my friend peeking out of his tent in the exact same fashion. He quickly moves his finger over his mouth in an exaggerated hush signal, then used the same hand to frantically motion towards the way of the trail. Then we see them, 4 adults, 3 men and 1 woman, walking directly towards our camp. No lights illuminating their path. They are walking silently at this point. Only one of them has a backpack, an impossibility for the long hike they were a third of the way through. Being a long trip, you bring wood cutting supplies to chop branches into smaller branches to burn. For me, this was a survival knife. Grabbing the knife, believing it is my only way of defending myself, I am more disheveled than I ever have been, especially knowing that a knife is barely defense at all. These people walk into our site, sit down by our extinguished fire pit, and just sit there for what felt like an eternity. My friend speaks up and asks what they are doing in our campsite. Without answering the question, they ask if we have any food. Having packed as lightly as possible for the long trip, we had only a few extra Mountain House MRE-style meals. I grab one out of my bag and toss it to one of the men. In rapid succession, I ask why they aren't using a light, if they need help finding the trail, and why they are hiking so late. They respond with the following: "We don't use lights. We know where the trail is. It is better to hike late at night." Unnerved at this point, my friend asks them to leave. They respond by asking if we want to light the fire and hang out for a bit. No, we do not. They grab their bag, get up, and leave without speaking another word. We watch them leave and take shifts making sure that they didn't come back. Needless to say, we both got very little sleep that night. When the sun rose the next morning, we finally got real sleep. By the afternoon, when we woke up, it all felt like a weird dream of sorts. The only evidence was a fuzzy cap that they must have dropped that I have to this day. I have never had something as weird, spooky as that happen in the woods and hope to never have it happen again. In the 8 years since that trip, I haven't been back to the Loyal Soak Trail. On our drill ship that was built in China, we noticed on the drawings there was a room. We went to look at it and couldn't find an entrance, but the spacing was obvious there was an extra room. It might not sound so creepy unless you've been in these shipyards where 2 things are known to happen: stowaways, although I doubt it in this case, but also hundreds of workers at any given time following orders blindly. So we confirmed that the room had all 6 sides, yet not a single weld on the outside. There is only one way this could have happened, and I'm sure you're starting to get it now. They must have welded from the inside for this room and then realized they had no way out upon completion if the gases didn't kill them first. It's extremely heavy around that room. People say they hear things. I have definitely. This isn't some old ship either. I rode this ship from China to Amsterdam after completion, and then the maiden voyage to America. I guess it happens quick. Essentially, when you're building a ship, all projects are almost happening at the same time. It's not always a ground-up situation. People will be welding crane masts while others are under it welding the floor beneath. There are literally hundreds of people all working on it at the same time. This room had no outer welds whatsoever, which means the welds are from the inside. The theory is that they all welded the different pieces together without realizing they weren't leaving themselves an opening because they all have different jobs and typically don't collaborate. Because the room is sealed on all 6 sides to our knowledge. I doubt it was all 6 sides at once. It would have been the last 2 sides and them thinking the other was leaving an opening. I hope that explains it. I said in an earlier comment there's a possibility that there's an opening between the room and hull, because it does look sealed at the bottom and top, but due to the size of the ship, I can't rule out it absolutely went all the way to the hull just from looking at the decks above and below. The double bottom is inspected every so often by a third engineer. It's not a place people go because there's not much of a reason. I've only been just to see what it's like, so I never thought about connecting the two. I'm a little late to this thread, but I hope this doesn't get buried because this story still haunts me. I worked as the county historic preservationist in southern Appalachia, working on the buildings and properties the county owned. One of the benefits included with my job was living on site at one of the historic properties. The historic house was an imposing brick mansion built in the 1810 seconds, and I lived in a small caretaker's house about 20 feet away. This was in the backwoods, so to deter trespassing and vandalism, the county had built an 8 feet tall fence around the entire 5-acre parcel and put barbed wire on top of the fence. I mention this all just to show it was basically impossible for anyone or anything to jump or climb over the fencing and onto the property. One night, after working late at another property, I pulled up to my entrance gate, let myself in, locked it behind me, and then drove the 100 yards down the gravel road to my house. There were no lights on the property, so I could only see by my headlights. As I turned my car around the corner of one of the outbuildings and parked it, my lights shone on a thing that I still have a hard time describing effectively. It was the size of a deer, but with long spindly legs and long shaggy hair, almost like a taller maned wolf. If you've ever seen pictures of one of those, that alone shook me, as there was no way something of that size should have been able to get through or over my fencing. What follows is absolutely true. I got out of my car to get a better look at what the hell the thing was, and as I opened the door and got out, the thing took off running away, not on 4 legs, but on 2. I literally watched this thing raise its back up, stand at full height on its back legs, and sprint away. I absolutely freaked out at that point, grabbed my mag light and my shotgun from inside and tried to find the thing again. There was no trace, no tracks or anything. I have no idea how it got in or out of my property. I didn't sleep at all that night, just sat on my couch with my shotgun watching my front door, hoping that whatever I saw didn't come back and burst in. I cannot explain what the hell I saw that night, but it still raises the hair on my neck every time I think about it. When I was a kid living in Queensland, Australia, I used to bush bash, meaning walk off the beaten track through thick scrub. I knew the national park my house backed onto like the back of my hand. I knew from the topography where I was at all times. Both my parents were ex-military and had a sort of hands-off, trusting me even as young as 12 to venture off on my own into the wilderness, so I could just pack a lunch, and my sister and neighborhood friend would come with. We'd head off early in the morning, returning just before sunset usually. Once, when I, the oldest, was about 14, we had been following creek beds and bashing over heavily forested hills towards an area I'd never been. We came down a hill, through a gully full of ferns, and followed a dry creek for another hour. The sides of the creek became steep and rocky. Before long, we were passing through a gorge. As we emerged from the gorge, we noticed what looked like a dwelling. Being idiot kids, we wanted to see what was up. It looked abandoned at first, But as we got closer, we saw that tarps had been affixed to the ramshackle structure. Chicken wire surrounded what looked like a pen just outside. As my eyes traveled across it, I suddenly caught another pair of eyes looking directly back at me, a Rottweiler. We started slowly edging back away from the property, but it was too late. The dog started going nuts and worried that it was coming after us, or at least alerting the person living in the hut. We bolted. I went back to the area a few times, but not too close to the abode itself, and found discarded bones from small game and other bits and pieces, spent .22 casings and such. As an adult and knowing the area, it's very likely we stumbled across either a homeless person camping out or a meth lab, as the area, as I would find out as an adult, was absolutely riddled with meth labs. I worked for a power company restoring power after a storm. Was working when a lady came up complaining that her power went out. We explained to her that's why we were there and she should have power back soon. She said, "Oh good, my son went down in the basement and now I can't find him." I went with her with a flashlight down the road to a rundown house that was partially caved in. She walked inside and I went to follow. As soon as I walked into the door, she disappeared from my sight and I called for her multiple times. No one responded, so I ran back to our work truck to call for help. A man that was living on her street called to me asking what's wrong, and I told him the situation. He looked at me with a cold stare and said a mom and her son died in that house 4 years ago. I'm still shook to this day. He used to be a supervisor for a janitorial company, and a couple times a week I had to go to a middle school and clean their hallway floors and gymnasium with a Zamboni-type vehicle that mopped and scrubbed the floor. When I was there, I had the whole school to myself. Used to get finished quickly and go to the library and read while eating my dinner. Well, one morning after being there, I get a call from school security, and they want me to come in. When I get there, I see a police car too. Oh, I think. They ask me a few questions like, did you notice anything out of the ordinary or strange while you were here last night? No, I hadn't. Usually have headphones in. Security then shows me camera footage of someone breaking into one of the classrooms while I was riding the Zamboni not far away. I was there for another 2 hours. Nothing was stolen. But the worst part was they didn't have footage of the person leaving. They didn't go out the way they came in. And police had to sweep the entire school. Never did find out what happened with that one. My oldest brother used to work the overnight sprinklers on a golf course. He took me out one time just for fun, and as we were driving uphill on a fairway, a figure of a lady appeared in the headlights at the top of the hill. My brother steered a little to the left of her and kept driving right on by. I stared right into her eyes as we drove by and she stared back. Her eyes glowed like a cat in the night. As soon as we were out of voice range, I asked my brother what the hell was that. He calmly responded, "Yay, she lives on the golf course and likes to terrorize the workers from time to time. I usually see her out here once a week." All right, cool. I used to work out in the woods in Florida a lot. Creepiest thing would be this day we were working near Big Cypress, tromping through the brush all day. At the end of the day, my coworker and I do a quick drive-through of some of the property and realized the place was absolutely infested with water moccasins. We had been unknowingly essentially walking around a giant water moccasin pit all day. That one kind of fucked me up. I'm not sure this counts, but I'm a teacher at an urban public school and was at work late grading and getting ready for the next day. Time had kind of flown by, and before I knew it, it was 7 p.m. I start packing up to leave in a building that is, in theory, locked and empty besides me, when our Alice alarm goes off, indicating an armed intruder in the building. I am 1, alone 2, young 3, freaked AF because I am absolutely not ready to fight a gunman over my lesson plans. I book it out of the school and dive into my car, hearing the alarm blaring the entire time. I peel out the parking lot and can see in my rear view the alarm light still flashing and debate never going back. Cause fuck that Elmo. Turns out they were doing routine maintenance and didn't send out an email to the teachers. I was a tutor for an elementary school where I would pull out advanced reads and conduct a book club of sorts to encourage kiddos that were ahead of their classmates to still find interest in reading. Law. This was around the time when school shootings were getting really rampant in the US a couple years ago. So there I am, alone with 5 third graders joking around and having book club in the empty classroom I was allowed to use. All of a sudden, an alarm goes off and an announcement is made that there is an active shooter on campus and we must lock our doors and conduct active shooter protocol. I lose my fucking mind. I usher the students into a little coat closet out of view of the door, lock the door, and flick off the lights. To make it worse, me being a stupid college student at the time, I never had my phone charged. I send as many texts to loved ones as I can, trying not to alarm them but letting them know I love them and something is happening at work before my phone dies. The students are also afraid and about 30 minutes passes. I hear footsteps outside of the door and quite literally stop breathing, but they go past. I don't hear any shots or anything. Another 30 minutes pass and I realize that I should call the front office to see if they have any updates. My brain goes stupid during emergencies. Apparently, I forgot that classrooms have built-in phones during my panic. They answer like nothing is wrong and I say something like, "Hi, I'm a tutor here and have 5 students with me in size room. Is it safe to come out? Are the police here?" The woman doesn't answer for a little and dead ass says, "Oh, did we not make an all-clear announcement? The drill is over." I was so close to tears and just hung up, lol. Then an announcement is made that the drill is over. Nobody thought it would be important to let an outside school contractor know about a drill that very well could have been real. I swear I could have pissed myself. We were wrapping up for the day in northern Canada. I am fueling up the side boom. I'm all by myself at this point cause I was tired of listening to the laborers whine of the cold, so I told him I would take care of the rest. Think bulldozer with no blade but a giant metal boom on the side that we used to razor and lower pipe. It's February, so pitch black. I keep hearing some weird sound. I can't quite hear it cause the pump is too loud. I search around a couple times and see nothing. I get in the truck and take off, drive past the front of the side boom to see a cougar sitting on top of a dirt pile 15 feet away. The damn thing was just watching me there and probably could have ended me without me even realizing it. I've never seen a cougar in the wild before and it's hard to understand just how big they are and how powerful until you see one up close. That thing leaped off the 6 feet pile and probably didn't touch ground for 15 to 20 feet. It's terrifying to think something so big and powerful could just be sitting there deciding if they want to make you dinner. We live in the woods bordering a massive park system in Alberta. We have bears, lynx, moose, wolves, and cougars. The cougars, well, and moose scare me more than anything else out here. My cougar story: my husband and I were out hiking an old hunting trail quite far into the park with our dog. The dog was super big, a Rottweiler, Irish wolfhound, and very well trained. He sadly passed away at a fairly young age. We'd been out hiking for about 2 hours and stopped for a rest on a fallen log. We'd been sitting for just a few minutes when suddenly the dog sits up and stares intently into the dense brush bordering the path. After a minute, he jumps up and starts growling intensely, hackles up, standing between us and the brush. We don't see a thing, but we know there's cougars in the area. And not much else is so quiet and hidden out there, so we pack up and start hiking back. The dog is super relieved we're leaving and walks alongside us, checking behind us every so often. We hike back for 10 minutes or so and the dog stops again, staring behind us and starts growling loudly again. We have bear spray, but no gun, and we figure the cougar is following us now. So we keep hiking back, adrenaline high, bear spray out. It goes like that for roughly an hour, hike for a while, dog watching our back and occasionally stopping to snarl, growl at whatever he senses that we don't see. The dog stayed tense the rest of the way back and kept checking over our shoulders, but the last half of the hike back home he didn't growl at anything else at least. Still scared the crap out of us both, and we were super grateful that the dog stuck to us instead of running off to chase off the cougar, which ends in them being eaten, but was big and aggressive enough to keep the cougar at bay. When I was 15 years old, I was doing my 4 a.m. newspaper delivery round on bicycle. I was driving into the garden of this one subscriber where I saw 2 guys with flashlights looking through the windows of the house. I was a bit in shock and just said, "Good morning, guys." They were just as much in shock and an awkward silence followed. I tried to break the silence by asking if I could pass them to deliver the newspaper through the door. One of the guys said the person living in that house did something to his family and they took it as an opportunity to get away in their car that was still running. When they were gone, I rang the doorbell at the house to tell them what happened and they should keep an eye out. My mom used to live in a small town in the Cascade Mountains and worked as a forest ranger. The creepiest thing that happened was when the oldest male ranger kept hitting on her and trying to get her to come home with him. Not very out of the ordinary, but many years later after she'd left the town, she found out he had been convicted of manslaughter and had killed a young female ranger right before she got hired. She would have probably been his next target. Some friends and I were fishing a small pond just after dark for catfish. We started to hear sounds coming off the water like someone throwing softball-sized rocks, but they were coming from all over the pond. We thought someone was messing with us and we called out a few times for them to stop, but we eventually got freaked out and left. Cut to a few years later, I'm fishing a different pond and hear the same sound. Turns out it was a beaver slapping its tail on the water to drive me from its territory. When beavers become problems in rivers, they relocate them to ponds in town. I've been fishing out in the Gulf of Mexico where they have some oil rigs. This rig wasn't being used, from what we knew, so we would get pretty close to it to fish for red snapper. While we were out there, we could have sworn we heard screams of a woman over and over. It was some shit, but the explanation was the wind making the noises as it blew through the rig. Well, that's what we were told, but it totally creeped us the fuck out. I work as a polar bear guard, as in, I escort people across tundra and mountains and protect them from polar bears. I once saw a snowman totem with reindeer antlers coming out of his head. It was deformed, full of bullet holes and rather creepy. There was one time when I was going to the gym at 6 in the morning. Because it's just to the gym, I wasn't going to bring a gun. Then I got an alert on my phone saying a bear was in the area, so I decided to stay in bed and eat Maltesers. It later turned out that the bear was on my route to the gym at the exact time I would have been walking down without a gun. And it was dark and snowy, so I would definitely have been an entree for the bear. That was off duty though. On duty, there's not really been any close calls. Just the occasional, hey look everyone, there's a bear hey over there, have a look through my binoculars. Also just be a bit more alert. The rule is that if it is within 300 meters, I prepare to shoot it. If it is within 100 and coming towards me, that's when I really regrettably have to shoot it. I don't want to shoot a bear, and so far, I haven't had to. I hope I never do. I work off a secluded, wooded area here in Texas. Every now and again when I finish with a job site, I'll pop into the head office. It's the creepiest feeling at night, mostly no light, and I've seen a bobcat a couple of times. The kicker is, the walls are all glass, so when I have the light on inside, I know I'm being watched by someone or something. Spent a summer in Wyoming going to BLM land and other remote locations collecting data on bats and herpetofauna. Heard a lot of weird noises like mountain lions screaming, deer snorting, what sounded like owls fighting. Woke up one morning to find 2 bull moose sleeping 20 yards behind my tent. All of this was part of the job until one night a truck was driving towards us when we were on a BLM square in the southwestern part of the state. The truck was going overland, no road, and was slowly driving at us. It stopped about 100 yards away, turned off the lights, and we could see a person get out. They walked a full circle around us at about 100 yards away, got back in the truck and turned around. This was after dark, and this shadowy figure did a complete circle around us. You could hear them walking through the sagebrush, and I'm sure they could hear us talking. We packed up after that and drove to a hotel an hour away. I called the office and told them I was taking a gun when we went back out. Didn't like having the bear mace as our only defense. Edit. BLM stands for Bureau of Land Management. I used to work in the Gulf of Mexico on oil rigs for years, and it may not exactly be creepy, but I found it really unsettling. In deep, open water, the water itself is really clear, so everyone can plainly see all the tuna and barracudas hanging around the rig waiting for the onboard cook to throw off whatever food waste he needs to. Every once in a while, a huge great white shark would swim up from underneath and snatch a tuna, and it really took like less than a second. They're really scary. I live in a rural town and this happens quite often. I have 2 stories with close friends where this happened DTO their pets. Once my friend actually had to kill a juvenile cougar because he crept up and stole his dog right from beside him. He didn't notice till it was already a few feet away because the dog whimpered and screeched. He chased after the cougar and it fumbled the dog a bit, slowing it down enough to be grabbed by the body. He said he tried everything from jabbing its neck to hitting its head and it just wouldn't budge or let the dog go. He managed to grab a 2x4 and repeatedly bludgeon its neck until it stopped moving. The dog survived with wounds and broken jaw, but just after being free the dog ran home and he followed after her. The neighbors were all shouting at him, calling him a dog beater, and he had literally just fought and won against a cougar. It turns out a whole family of desperate cougars were living under the balcony of a residential preschool, which was right in front of where he was fighting the cougar. The whole family of cows were probably watching it all happen. The other story is short and sad. My friend left him cat on a leash while he went to work and returned only to not be able to find her. Eventually, after tons of searching, he found his cat's head behind his house in the forest. Spent a summer doing conservation work out in the absolute middle of nowhere in Wyoming. Was part of a crew that would spend 2 weeks camping in remote places to do manual labor in places machines couldn't get to. For this story, we were building new biking trails in the back portion of a designated wilderness area in a high-altitude desert. This means that the nearest civilization was a 2-hour car ride to a town of 41 people in a sandy soil area where tracks last forever. It was the middle of our stint during the early part of the night where everyone else had gone to bed, but I stayed up to read, so maybe 11:30 or so. Still pitch black outside, clouds had covered stars, so my headlamp was probably the only light on in a 40-mile radius. Suddenly I hear footsteps walking around our camp and head towards the tents from where I was in the community tent. That sound immediately put me on edge as I felt the hair on my arms raise and my adrenaline spike. I recall thinking to myself that two things are very wrong since the person was not using a light to see and the footsteps were not coming towards me from the tents. Rather, it was the opposite. Within the 4 seconds it took me to drop my book, get up, and turn the corner of the tent to cast my light on the sleeping tents. The sound had stopped, but I saw tracks in dirt before me. Looked like they came from one end of camp. Looked into my tent, walked through the sleeping tents and kept going out of camp again. I don't know if I was making too much noise or not by walking around, but the rest of my crew ended up waking up and asking me what was going on from inside their tents. After explaining what I found, they all got up to look at the boot prints in the dirt. They were damn near perfect copies of my own boots except for one small thing. I had a rock stuck in my treads that messed up the symmetry. I was wearing fairly common work boots, except I also happened to wear US size 15 double wide boots. So there was no way in hell this was one of the other crew members. I don't think any of us slept much that night. Never saw or heard anything more after that night. A light rain removed the tracks a couple days later, but I do remember none of us were willing to step on the prints themselves and choose to step over them like cracks in the sidewalk. I currently work for the USDA. I would recommend any of the government organizations, federal or state, if you can afford the smaller paycheck but the stable schedule is more important to your lifestyle. Switched from private industry when we had our first kid. The private industry is where all the money is, but you'll need a degree to advance past entry level. Also be prepared for travel. One thing I will say is don't skip over the energy sector. Oil, mining, gas, coal, and all the others are heavily regulated, which means they stay on top of environmental issues and have positions to manage such things. If you like overtime, looking into HAZMAT or emergency response companies can give you interesting stories. I particularly enjoyed fishing in hydrous ammonia tanks out of flood water with a crane for 2 weeks. I won't name specific companies since they are all different based on location. I used to own a horse boarding and training farm with about 45 acres surrounded by woods. I used to spend the night there quite a bit because I had to start chores early in the morning, so if I stayed too late it wasn't worth it to drive home. One night at about midnight my dog started to bristle up and growl at the door of the office I slept in. And then my iPod, which I kept on a speaker in the middle of the barn, started blasting out Johnny Cash's Ring of Fire at full volume, which I definitely hadn't left it on. Let me tell you, that song is fucking freaky as shit in the middle of the night. Like shit your pants freaky. My dog was full on growling and barking at the door, so I cracked it and let him run out, figuring that if someone were in or around the barn he'd get them. Anyone there would have been trespassing at that time of night. After a few minutes I went out of the office into the barn aisle with a bat to turn off the creepy ass music. The light I usually kept on so I could see around was off, so it was pitch dark in most of the barn. My dog was just staring out the barn door, which I kept open in the summer to keep the horses cooler, with his hair bristled but wasn't leaving the barn. which he was allowed to do. I wrote it off as creepy as fuck, but ultimately just one of those things, you know, like it's weird and I can't explain it. But there's got to be an explanation I'm just not privy to. But the real scary part is that my property shared a private gate in back with the property closest to mine, which had a gate at the back. Most of my property was fenced because of the horses, and the property next to mine was like dozens of acres fenced with a chain link fence, which, if you know anything about rural fencing, is not done. Anyways, we found out later that the owner of the adjoining property was Todd Colehep, the South Carolina serial killer. He had a woman chained up like a dog on his property who he and his friends would rape and walk around the property on a leash. He also had some bodies of people he killed buried on his property. He was doing all that stuff while I lived next to him. In fact, I used to ride on his property but would always turn around if I heard machinery, in retrospect probably burying bodies, or got the creeps, like something would tell me to turn around and go home. I was probably one of the few, if not only, person besides his friends who were raping the woman to go on his property while all that was going on. I was the creepy occurrence. I live on a ranch off of a quite dirt road. Our distant neighbors, nearest houses about 1 mile away as the crow flies, have had issues with people stealing things out of their outbuildings and storage sheds in the area. It was also late in the year, so it was starting to get dark around 6 p.m. So as a result, every time I would see headlights go down our road, I would watch to make sure they weren't stopping on the property. One evening, I see a vehicle going very slowly down the road and come to a stop at the end of our driveway, about 120 yards from our front porch. The vehicle is parked right in front of a 60s pickup I have parked, so I think whoever it is might be looking to steal it, or just looking over the property. Whatever the case, I decide to put on a black coat and grab my rifle to go investigate. It's dark out, so I stay out of the headlights of the vehicle so I can get close. I can tell it is a white van, but I don't see anything else distinguishing about the van. When I'm about 50 yards away, the van backs up and turns into our driveway. I freeze as the headlights wash across me standing in the middle of my driveway, and I see the reflective FedEx logos on the side of the van. Needless to say, the FedEx driver probably shit his pants as he suddenly sees a dark figure standing in the middle of a field, in the dark, holding a rifle. Surprisingly, after I try to give a friendly wave and smile, he continues up the driveway to the house, and I get to explain the situation and we both have a laugh. So that's how I got to be the creepy guy in some FedEx delivery driver's story. I work for a medical examiner and used to be on the graveyard shift alone. The first night I was on at midnight on the dot, our air system shut off, which caused the vents to warp. That shit sounded like somebody running through the vents in the ceiling on all fours. Thankfully, I got used to it lol, but def creepy at first. Another night we lost power, and stupid me watching a horror movie, working so hard almost shit my pants when everything went dark, and knowing that a room with around 30 dead bodies and it was walking distance away. That one I stayed in my car for, not to mention the constant long dark red lit hallways. Glad I'm not on overnight now. I spent some time in the peat swamp forests of Borneo studying wild orangutan. We would go into the forest very early, around 4 a.m. One morning there was a clouded leopard on the trail we used to enter the forest. It was just crouched there watching us. We shouted, tried to act big. One of the indigenous people we worked with even took out his slingshot and shot rocks at it. He missed on purpose, just trying to scare it off. It stayed there for a good 5 minutes watching us before it slowly walked into the thick brush off the cleared trail. When we walked by, I shined my light to where it had walked to and could clearly see a pair of reflective eyes only 3 meters away, crouched watching us pass. Creepy, but also incredibly cool to see one in person for how critically endangered they are. Edit. Since I've got quite a few requests for pictures, I just posted a picture I took of a baby orangutan named Merker. Edit. These were wild orangutans. We tried our best to keep our distance and never tried to touch them. The goal was to observe them while trying not to affect their natural behavior. That being said, over my year there I did get charged by one of the big dominant males in the area on 3 separate occasions, which is its own terrifying story to tell another time. He never did touch me, but sure scared the hell out of me and made me run. Edit. Since a lot of people are asking, I am American who studied biology in college. How I got this job was a combination of luck and preparation. I worked my butt off in college and had field experience, and then we had a guest speaker one day who was a big name in orangutan conservation research talk to us. I had always wanted to go to Borneo and got to speak with her after the talk and discovered that she needed 2 students to go do research for a year after graduation. She interviewed me and the rest was history. I do want to mention to anyone considering this field that it is hard work. We would wake up at 3:30 a.m., spend 14 minutes 15 hours in a swamp forest following wild orangutans, taking data every 2 minutes. It was hot, humid, and tons of mosquitoes. No communication to the outside world except on our days off, where we could take a 15-minute walk to a tree stand where we could sometimes get 1 bar of service to send a few WhatsApp messages to family. The camp was only 15-ish people and we would spend 2-4 months there at a time before going back to the city, Palancaria, to bring back samples. The location of this research was in central Kalimantan, Borneo. That all being said, it was an amazing experience, of course. Saw animals and insects that just blew my mind and I miss it all the time. Happy to answer some more questions in PMs as low as I'm not flooded. Working on ships. There was one night I was on a ship sailing through Alaskan waters, and it happened to be my first night ever seeing northern lights. I can't believe how awesome that was. It made the sky clear, made the night look like it was dusk. We were able to see clearly for miles. Few buddies and I hit the roof, or what we call Lido deck, at 1 a.m. just to gaze at it. An hour or so in, there was 6 of us on top, nearly the entire crew now. A big white spotlight shines at us. We were near land, but where the spotlight was above the water and it wasn't low enough to be on a ship. This was very high up. It shined on us for about 15 minutes 20 seconds. Once the light turned off, we looked to see what it was. Saw nothing, no trace of an aircraft or anything. Couple minutes go by and the same light shined on us. This time it was on the other side of our vessel, above mountains. Still unable to see what it was. We all saw it. We all have never seen any aircrafts hovering above these waters, especially at 2 a.m. We don't know what it was. We think it might have been some sort of silenced aircraft. The military was probably doing drills or something. But anyways, that was one of the weirder things to happen out on the ocean. Used to teach outdoor education, which was essentially just summer camp during the school year, and school groups would come up and spend a few days at the camp. On their last night, we would always tell them a scary story around the campfire. It was the same scary story every time. We worked in partners, so there were always 2 staff members for every school group. One staff member would tell the story and the other staff member would go hide in the forest and make scary noises. So, I'm telling the story and every few minutes there's like a snap of a twig or rustling in the bushes, and of course, as always, the kids all get freaked out and they start getting scared. It's very fun. Well, as I'm telling a story, I'm walking around the campfire looking at all the kids' faces, and I noticed a familiar one. My partner Eric, sitting there smiling at me, wondering why I'm staring at him. My heart has never started beating so fast in my life. Eventually, I sped through the story and all the kids left, and I explained to Eric that I thought it was him in the woods, and his eyes got very wide. He said, "Are you telling me that that wasn't one of the staff members?" So we both ran back to the main road. I work in northern British Columbia doing bush grinding. My brother and I go in after the logging companies and grind all the leftover piles of wood into trucks to take to the mills for wood pellets. Back in February of this year, we were on night shift about 3 hours from the closest town, and the few locals that lived out there warned us about a pack of timber wolves that was about 25 strong and oddly fearless. It was about 3 in the morning and we had worked our way down the block road about half a mile. And one of us needed to walk back to the pickup truck to bring it closer to fuel up the machines. Of course, I drew the short straw and went for a walk. Not even halfway to the truck, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I felt like I was being watched, so I sweeped my flashlight beam across the tree line and all the eyes watching me lit up. Of course, I left my shotgun in the truck, and I didn't think running was a wise idea, so I kept walking swiftly while focused on the tree line, watching the eyes follow me the rest of the way back to the truck. I got to the truck fine and obviously never left it too far away again. I've had many creepy and interesting encounters in the bush, but this one was definitely one of the oh shit moments. I worked in a salt mine under Lake Erie a couple years ago, and generally speaking, when things are brought down, they're never brought back up. It takes a lot of time to disassemble everything up top, secure and cover the parts, and put it back together down below, and vice versa. So there's tons of old trucks, tractors, and countless other things lined up in the far side of the mine. Anyway, in the 80 seconds, U of Michigan and Cal Irvine were studying proton decay and trying to capture measurements when it actually happened. Conducting this experiment topside is problematic because of cosmic rays and other forms of interference. So the mine was chosen as 2,000 feet of earth absorbs pretty much everything. So they dug out a pool, about 80 by 70, filled it with 2,640,000 gallons of purified water, and put fancy cameras and other equipment along the side. They had a whole shop, lab, and dive center down there. I don't think they ever captured a proton decaying, and eventually the grant money ran out after a few years, so the mine threw up some caution tape on the main steel door leading to the study. And that was that. Fast forward 20 years and I'm working there as an electrician, and I get a job to fix some big conveyor motor drive, so I set off and try to cannibalize some parts off old equipment. I remember one of the old-timers telling me there's a bunch of abandoned equipment in an area by the Kepi lift, the main elevator. I get over there and find a big steel door falling off its hinges with some very old caution tape laying on the ground. The whole study had to be accessed through this one door, which was dug into the wall, so after a while, the earth slowly crushes, bends, and pushes the ground up. After several tries, I yank the door open and step inside only to shit myself and fall back when I see a full scuba outfit, wetsuit, mask, belt, gloves, hanging 3 feet inside. So I collect myself, find that I didn't actually shit myself. How? I'll never know, and go inside, past the goddamn scuba dude. Everything inside was left exactly how it was left 20 years ago. Coffee cups left out, day planners, job schedules, along with tons of scuba gear, oxygen-filled tanks, and computers. I make it about 10-ish feet to the edge of the pool, and it's hard to see if the water's still in it because there's no wind to move it. But eventually I see it's still there, 60+ feet of pure water in an absolutely dark pool, the side of a huge black pool in a huge black hole in the ground, lit only by the small amount of light my cap lamp put out, and the absolute silence of being underground made me really uncomfortable, so I left in a hurry. So that's my story. It's not particularly scary, but all that stuff sitting down there nearly perfectly preserved in such an unexpected place was always just creepy to me. I was serving as a fireman for my nation's compulsory national service. Once, we were called into the forest to retrieve a body who was found hanging on a noose deep along one of the running trails. He had apparently committed suicide by hanging himself off a tree, was found by a few morning joggers. What's creepy was, we found a straw doll at the foot of the tree. It was stabbed with a few red bobby pins in the head, facial area, and there was also an unknown talisman that was half burnt where the doll was sitting. When we took the body down, we had to carry him a few kilometers out of the forest, and halfway along the journey, a previously unnoticed wound on his face started bleeding. One of my men swore that it was bleeding from the same spot as where the bobby pin was stuck on the doll, but we could not confirm it as we left the doll where his body was found. For the police, passed the body to the paramedics and booked our way out of the area. Edit. While thank you for the upvotes and the award, glad that everyone enjoyed the story. Yes, this happened in Southeast Asia, where almost all religion exists here. I worked in a store once in a really small town that was always absolutely dead, a customer every hour or so, shifts all alone too, which I'm sure wasn't even legal, but hey. Anyway, it's a dark evening and I'm sat on Reddit as usual when I hear the door open. I look up and see the back of a man as he begins walking down the first aisle towards the tin foods, and he appears to be talking to someone on the phone. I think nothing of it and go back to Reddit. All of a sudden I get this intense smell of soil and earth. I look up and the man's approaching the counter, and he's wearing some kind of overalls, and his face and long gray hair and body is just covered in dirt. That's when I notice he isn't on the phone at all and is just talking to himself in this absolutely bizarre tone. He sounded like a cartoon elf or something. He's just sort of murmuring and doing this really weird hey sort of laugh. I'm just frozen solid as he stood at the counter in front of me, thinking I'm about to be killed, when a policeman storms through the door. He asks if I'm okay, to which I don't respond because I'm just in a complete state of what the fuck is happening. Tells the man to come outside, to which he starts murmuring gibberish and saying the words legal over and over again. They come grab the man and put him in the back of the police car, and that's the last I ever heard of it. I have no idea who he was, what was going on, but I have never been so afraid of another person before. You know, when you just sense a bad situation. So grateful the police showed up when they did.